great column in the Inquirer each Sunday as well. He's our guest here on the Pete Thompson Show. Good morning, Frank. How are you?
Good morning, Pete. I'm doing great, thanks.
I'm happy to have you on. First, tell people about the column that you have on Sundays and the slant that you get to take in that column each Sunday.
Well, basically what it began as was, there's a lot of sports history in Philadelphia. I mean, this is one of the older cities in the country. It's got one of the deepest and richest sports heritages. And, we just thought there's an awful lot that happened of significance that people today might not remember or recall. A lot of interesting characters that passed this way. And we thought, I kind of look at that column as a way of showcasing some of these things and maybe enlightening a new generation on some of the more interesting aspects of our city's sporting past.
Certainly a good segue there then by you to talk about a 67-year-old man that left an impact both on the Sixers and the game in general, and that's Bobby Jones. And you wrote the initial article saying that he was getting in, and then you went up to Springfield for his induction speech. What can you tell us about Bobby Jones finally going into the Basketball Hall of Fame and why you thought that was so deserving?
Well, it's interesting, Pete, but you look at Bobby's stats and you think, now those of us in Philadelphia remember him well, and we probably have a different perspective. But anyone else looking at his stats, he averaged about 12 points a game and 6 rebounds. You certainly wouldn't think Hall of Famer. But the Hall, and to its credit, this year made a conscious decision that they were going to start taking defense into consideration in the selection process. And, of course, when you talk about defense, Bobby's one of the premier players probably in NBA history. So I think that's why in this year's Hall of Fame class, you saw not only Bobby, but you saw Sidney Moncrief, who was an all-NBA defensive star. You saw Teresa Weatherspoon on the women's side, probably the greatest women's defender, in the WNBA. So, once that door opened, Bobby was kind of a shoo-in, and just a nice, genuine, sincere, scrupulous man who appreciated this honor as much as I think anyone ever has. And it was just a real joy to kind of see him go in and see the way he was appreciated by all those who played along with him and played against him. A real underrated figure, I think, certainly in Sixers history.
Yeah, and they gave him a guideline for how long the speech would go. And you talk about scrupulous man. Or a man that follows the rules or plays by the rules. Boy, he was really determined to stay, within that time frame.
Yeah, I saw him that day, the day before the speech, and I asked him how it went. He said, fine. I said, are you going to run over? Because most of those speeches go long. I don't know if you remember Lefty Driesell a year or two ago went on for like 35 minutes, I think.
Right.
They give you this 5-minute guideline. But Bobby said, well, I'm a rules follower. I'm going to stick within those 5 minutes. And he did. And at times during his speech, he had a race. He was reading as fast as he possibly could. And he still got through with like a half a minute to spare. But that's just the kind of guy he is. When he was in the NBA, he wouldn't grab a player's shirt to grab him. He wouldn't. And I think I told this story in that story about the induction, but there's an interesting story about Bobby. There's a kind of a scrum of players on the sideline, and the ball bounces out of bounds, and the referee was screened and didn't see, who it went off of. Right. So he sees Bobby, and he says, Bobby, did that ball touch you last? And Bobby looks at him and says, yeah. And then he runs down the court because Billy Cunningham's going to get in his face, and he says, as I'm running down court, Billy's yelling, Bobby, let him do his job.
Hollering at him, the Kangaroo Kid. Hey, Billy was supposed to be there, and David Thompson as well. Unfortunately, Thompson fell ill, and then Billy got caught up because of the weather and Dorian. But the two guys that sat next to him were suitable replacements, I would gather.
Yeah, he got Julius Erving, who he wanted to have anyway, but he thought he'd only have two. And he got Charles Barkley to be, his presenters. So that's pretty. As Bobby noted, that's a pretty good bench to have when you can pick those guys off it. But I see Bobby was back in Philadelphia yesterday for Charles's statue unveiling at the Sixers practice facility. So I think he's really embracing his old team now, maybe a little bit more than he has over the years.
Well, that's good. Look, I'm a big fan of the history myself, Frank. Frank Fitzpatrick is with us, Philadelphia Inquirer. Make sure you read his work at Inquirer.com or find him at PhilaFitz is the Twitter handle. And, Frank, I'm a sucker for the old stuff, but I'm a sucker for the new stuff, too. And, a guy that I've met before, he was from the Plymouth Meeting area where I grew up. That's Steve Javie, and people remember him as the NBA referee. I loved your piece on the fact that he went from the hardwood to homilies. I mean, look, I was a deacon in my church. It was a Presbyterian church. That's not hard. They say, do you want to do it? You say yes. You take some flowers to the shut-ins and you visit with the congregation. I mean, what Steve Jaffe had to do, that was difficult.
Yeah, I was amazed at how intense the deaconate program is in the Catholic Church. I mean, to be I forget the exact title, but to be the level of deacon that Steve is required like a college education, basically. I mean, he spent 7 years going to St. Charles Seminary 1 or 2 nights a week, and there were oral exams, and I mean, it was a real grueling process, and he came out of it at the end. And so now, if you were to go to a mass, Steve might be there, assisting the priest, the celebrant, wearing robes of the clergy and looking as much like as a full-time Catholic priest as anybody else. It's really an amazing story what he went through. You're right.
Yeah, no doubt. A permanent deacon. Let's see, there is a name in here. What does it say?
Permanent. Yeah, I think that's right.
Permanent deacon. Sure. Frank Fitzpatrick is our guest. We are down the shore. 2 more columns that you had recently that I wanted to touch on. One, of course, if we're down the Jersey Shore, we have to talk about Dave Snyder. What a treasure of stories you uncovered there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Pete.
I'm sorry.
I'm in the car.
That's all right. We're down the shore, and I said 2 more stories I wanted to touch about, and one was Dave Snyder, or the column was titled "The Bouncer Who Became the King of Wildwood." What a great piece you had there. Yeah,
Dave, Pete, anybody that I think that's been to Wildwood through the years saw this guy. I mean, he was someone, a very distinctive-looking man with bright white hair and a wonderful tan and a great physique. And every day he would walk the beach, the complete beach of Wildwood, from Diamond Beach to Anglesey, back and forth. So that's like 10 miles. And he would stop and speak to the lifeguards. And then at night, he was a bouncer in almost every club that ever existed in Wildwood. He would sit outside on his stool and wave to the passing cars and, make jokes with anybody that was entering the place. He was just one of those characters you get at the shore that you don't sort of see as much anymore. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to find out a little bit more about him. And he was just an interesting guy. I really had a lot of fun doing that story.
Yeah, and I enjoyed reading it, and I'm a big fan of your work. I think when I told people on Facebook that I got this job, I believe you posted back and said, well, if you ever want to hear from an old guy, give me a ring. And I thought, yes, I want to hear your stories because, look, who better than you, Frank Fitzpatrick, to tribute Jack Whitaker, who I believe was on a plane that I was on once, and I went up and I said, are you Jack? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm a big fan. He said, thank you. And that was really my one interaction with a legend that was from our backyard.
Yeah, what a gracious man. It's amazing how many of those early TV pioneers, came from Philadelphia. And Jack he sort of created a whole new genre of sportscasting. I mean, the essayist, the guy that would come on maybe at the end of the event or at the beginning and would just sort of put it all in perspective with his eloquence and his eye for detail. Now you sort of have these, sometimes they're sideline reporters, sometimes they're just essayists like Jack. They're ubiquitous in sports telecasts, but Jack was really the first to do that. And, he was the guy that did the first Super Bowl. He was there for the first Super Bowl. He covered Olympics. He was just if you watched television in the 1950s and 60s and you were interested in sports, you saw Jack Whitaker, and you probably liked him because he was a really nice and gracious man, and I'm proud to say that he was from Philadelphia.
Frank Fitzpatrick's our guest here on the Pete Thompson Show. Find him on Twitter at PhilaFitz, PhilaFitz. Frank, you're still grinding away, buddy, you know, in an industry that I tell my media students has certainly changed the newspaper industry. I'm such a fan of your work. What do you got coming up? I mean, now that I guess we're back in the rotation here, right, of like Eagles are back and Flyers are right around the corner. And I mean, but you'll keep plugging away. You got anything in the hopper that we can look forward to?
I've got a couple stories. Yeah, one, you know, there's a boxer from West Philadelphia, a guy named Julius J. Rock Williams, who's a late middleweight champion. I'm going to be going out to talk to him in a couple of days, and I've got one coming up on their Arcadia University. We used to be Beaver,
right?
Has instituted hockey, ice hockey. They've got a men's program and a women's program, and the person they hired to coach their women's team is an African American, sort of a unusual African American women in ice hockey. So I'll be doing a story on that as well. So those are a couple of things I've got in the shoot.
I love that. Hey, Frank, I'll tell you what, you know, sometimes there's still kids from this area that go to Chestnut Hill College, and it's a guy, and I say, wait, there's guys at Chestnut Hill College? Like, you know, says the kid that once got kicked out of the all-female dorm for, you know, stepping foot inside there by the nun, right? I mean, nobody ever said that Pete Thompson was playing by the rules. Hey, let me ask you this before I let you go, right? So you run the gamut. I mean, do you come up with your columns? Do people like your topics? Do people email you? Where do the stories get generated from?
Yeah, I mean, I come up with as many as I can, and that's a diminishing number the older I get. But a lot of it comes from readers. You're right. I mean, a reader will read something about someone he didn't know about, or they'll say, you know, that's an interesting story. He reminds me of so and so, and he'll tell me the story of that person, and I think, oh, that's an interesting story. So, you know, that's the kind of way you're led into different avenues, and it's and sometimes you know, the editors come up with stuff. I'll give them credit, you know, and so it comes from a variety of places.
All right, Frank. Well, I'm so thrilled to have had you on for a little bit. I might have told you this before. My favorite thing you do when a Philly pro sports team is in like a championship, when you would walk around in 08 and sort of just have the observations or the tidbits, that's true Philadelphian to me. And